Troy was a really strange Total War game. It came out in August of last year, so that's almost exactly 10 months ago now. And I was affiliated with CA loosely, really loosely. I just got games early and for free at this point. So I got Troy early and I really didn't click with it. It just felt strange. That was the first time I really was forced to play with single entities. Also, something else was really off with it. The difficulty modifiers were the most extreme that I've ever seen in a Total War game. To the extent that a fair fight between two units of heavy Trojan spears results in a 7-to-1 KD ratio. Let's have a look, let's get to the end. So this was the video that I uploaded to show this. There may actually have been a more extreme discrepancy that emerged, but when heavy Trojan spears come up against each other on highest difficulties, you get a KD of 7. 17 times 7, it's like 15 times 705, so call that a 7 KD. That is absurd, that is ludicrous, and that was originally observed by Admiral Price. This was back when we were on fair terms, when there was still someone called it a veneer of neutrality, and then he approved of that description. So I'm going to go with that. Back when he still maintained a veneer of neutrality. Oh my god. So, yeah, he noticed that, and that was after I had complained about medium swords, I think, having a KD of 3. So along the same lines. Melee infantry and Troy were just crap. And of course, I had already been complaining about this in Three Kingdoms for months. They were crap in Three Kingdoms as well. And then the Warhammer that I avoided, everyone tells me that it's the exact same story. So this is a phenomenon. And this started, well, it's always been around, fake difficulty's always been around, but this phase of fake difficulty ramping up started with Rome 2, because Shogun 2 didn't have that. To this day, Shogun 2 has a really fair challenge, but when Rome 2 came out, I was just getting annoyed watching my Oathsworn be slowly ground into nothing by other infantry. It was just really annoying and unsatisfying, and that's part of why I ditched Total War, because there was just no satisfying gameplay to be had for me. And then of course 3K does the same thing, but for a while it was fun to have a cavalry merry-go-round going on, you know, just micro and cavalry everywhere, and trebuchets firing into blobs. That was interesting for a few weeks. But I was holding out for Troy, and then Troy does the exact same thing. And I quickly picked up on how bad it was on Troy, and that's what led to this discovery here that I uploaded a video for. And I complained about this problem because, of course, I'm loosely affiliated with CA. I want these games to be good so I can do things that are worth a damn for YouTube. Like, I want to be playing these games, that's all I've ever really wanted. But I'm just not able to really play the games and do cool shit, so if I can't do that, I can at least complain about it. So that's what I did. I was loosely affiliated, and I was in a partner Discord with CA and the partners, and there was a feedback channel, and I would complain on there and make my observations. So I started out just being kind of mild, but as I played it more and more, I would complain more and more about it. So I'm going to read through some examples. I should start off by showing this one. This was me complaining about Three Kingdoms on the 3rd of August, so this was weeks before Troy even launched, and it was before I even had early access to it. So I was already complaining about this really bad fake difficulty thing that's going on before I got my hands on Troy. I think part of me was really anxious about the possibility that Troy would launch and have a really bad case of this and just be written off. So I'm trying to head that off here, I think. Deep down, part of me wants to. So here's what I said. Player versus AI KDR in Legendary is 0.6 to 1.6. I'd be really curious to know what the gradient has to be to offset that back to 1-1. Because in these games with these hidden combat modifiers, you're constantly fighting up a 45-degree angle that you can almost never offset. You've got to just ignore those units that use those combat mechanics and instead play to rely on charge bonus or projectiles. So I'm basically talking about how the combat modifiers have the effect of just simulating a disadvantage at all times, and it affects the gameplay really badly, and you're playing to avoid it. And then I agree with one of the people in there called Wardog who was on the ball. So all this was back in early August before Troy came along and before I was even guaranteed to get my hands on it. I was already fighting this battle before Troy came along. I was already pushing for these improvements while I was affiliated with CA. I was using my affiliation to try and get their fucking attention to fix their games. Alright, so here we are a few days later. Troy has now gone into early access and I've played it for most of my first day, and I hop on to give feedback and I start out with, I don't understand how this can keep happening. Building entire games with painstaking attention to differentiating units and balancing and tweaking those discrete differences so that Aeginean runners are different from light swordsmen in a game that centres around the Trojan era, and then you just slap big ugly blanket -10 melee attack for player, +10 melee attack for AI, +10 morale for AI on the highest difficulty setting that every person serious about Total War is going to have no real choice but to take on from day one. You know I'm just going to be doing what I do for 3k in this game because I want to be effective. Make literally 0 infantry. It's going to be 10 units of archers and 5 units of chariots and whoosh. And I get pushback. A contention as banal as that one, and what I get for it is pushback. That's the actual response. It's just so strange. None of the actual developers acknowledge anything, but the random people there were. And here's another excerpt from later in that conversation. A warped meta, I say. The difficulty settings attack the meta and not the actual difficulty, just denatures the game and gameplay. And a game with literally no cav gets hit even worse than 3k. It would just be minimum infantry to achieve pinning and max ranged to ignore difficulty combat modifiers, i.e. totally passive and no actual playing happening, just sitting and watching wet noodles flying. So obviously at this point I've established a pattern because that's in Warhammer, and 3k has a similar kind of homogenous gameplay refuge that players take comfort in, and I've already just apparently identified what's going to happen with Troy. People are going to just pin with a few units of infantry and then spam ranged, and that's pretty much what happened. I remember people were talking about javelins and slingers being overpowered, so I had most of it right. What I forgot to mention here was having single entities that hold up entire armies and choke points, so you're just basically blobbing enemy units onto single entities and then spamming ranged into the blob. So I was close, I nearly had it. One of them pushes back a lot and then I eventually just decide I'm going to make a video, so I say I'll probably end up formalising this problem with a dedicated video at some point and then I'll link it here. The problem I'm describing is real and exists and has been articulated endlessly, like with the screenshots I posted above. Yeah, because it's like I'm being gaslighted, it's like people are denying what should be palpably obvious. I've got people in my Discord groaning about how Legend of Total War streams are spamming archers and watching things die. All that's changed here is that yet another game has come out apparently afflicted with it, if Admiral was right, and it is being addressed as it's breaking news. And while I'm on this one, if you ever wondered why Admiral Price just cited Jim Sterling for his mic drop and then just dipped out of Total War, here's here's a bit of a clue. Imagine you do everything that you're supposed to, and then you watch people much smaller than you surpass you and get into the in-group and be full-blown early accessors, like first tier early access, that put way less effort into their channel than you do, and fast forward nearly a year and you've made no progress whatsoever. That's enough to make anyone rage quit. And if you think I'm talking shit, fucking look at this. The original Total War YouTuber, I've already cited Prince of Macedon and his statements on this weird dynamic that we have before, but there's some added detail here that gives further clarification and emphasis that corroborates my hypothesis here. On top of everything else that I've already went over with other YouTubers after Rome Remastered and the whole shelling operation in general, it just piles up. It keeps piling up higher and higher and higher. All I need to do is wait and watch. Alright, next up. We're now in mid-August, and I've had some time to really get used to Troy, and I'm really not impressed. Here's what I say. It's the worst kind of fake difficulty. It's a hangover from the early days of game development when the game was finished and they had to figure out how to add difficulty levels, and the best they could do was the most effortless and lazily destructive fake difficulty of just flatly modifying with poorly implemented and not at all flat out blankets. Really abysmal. And as expected, the meta/balancing of the game has been completely destroyed. Did a similar job on 3K, and I don't even need to comment on Warhammer, because of course everyone knows that in Warhammer you're incentivized to just bring single entities, 19 of them, and just force multiply your way through enemy stacks. It's really monotonous and tedious. It makes no difference to me if AI spears pull a 3KD against me or a 100KD against me. Apparently it's 7. I've learned how the game works pretty well by this point, and I just can't justify further investment. And then Prussian Prince, to his credit, chips in with, because of course there's a lot of pornos here, like this is like a group chat, and these are all of the loosely affiliated people. There's Admiral Price there, and then there's just like 78 of us. And the thing is, of course there's big people like me. I was probably the biggest one, because of course people that are my size usually are properly affiliated and like fully involved with all of the marketing and PR and stuff. But I was in here with all the people that had uploaded like 5 or 6 Total War videos that had 20 views each and are allowed to talk in here, so... And Prussian Prince is here as well, of course. He's probably in a similar boat to me. This indicates why that might be the case. He chips in with, I agree, as long as the difference is there, whether it's small or significant, I hate it. This unfairly makes certain playstyles more viable than others too, like missile spam in Warhammer 2 or in here, chariots, because infantry is terrible when used conventionally against AI and you can only make it work by abusing. Yep, exactly, yeah, so he got it. And remember, the discourse back then was completely different. Like, if you were to even suggest that Warhammer was shit and that Shogun 2 was better, you would be bringing the mob down upon you. And of course, that's exactly what happened to me when I started uploading videos. But I continue, I didn't give up. So that was the 15th, and then I continue on the 17th. Honestly, I think difficulty-based combat modifiers need to be retroactively gutted out of all Total War games and never used going forward. They already have a better model with Shogun 2. It's just a blight. And here's Prussian chipping in again. By making player melee have such bad KD against AI melee, even if it was slight, it essentially makes infantry focus builds terrible. Having the same unit be so bad against the same unit, I mean, that really affects tactics in a bad way, no? Forcing you to abuse and cheat since the AI gets such an advantage you can't play normally. Fake difficulty by giving AI battle bonuses. The player doesn't understand the intended strength of units anymore, and this is true as well. I've went into this and how bad this is in my Disintegration of Total War's Order of Battle video. And of course, it arbitrarily forces different playstyles. Yep, exactly, because it encourages a deviation, avoidant gameplay. You're playing to avoid the modifiers, that's all you're doing. You're not playing to embrace ideas and different avenues. You're just playing to avoid, at all costs, suffering from these malices that you get. Yeah, Prussian game's ruined. Shogun 2 doesn't have any of this, and imagine if it did. Imagine if Katana Samurai and Shogun 2 just plain sucked. The game would immediately be terrible. Yep. So I uploaded this video that confirms Admiral Price's finding, and I say, here it is, fully apparent and completely undeniable. The damage this does to game balancing and meaningful gameplay can't really be overstated. It was already bad in previous games that did this, but this is the worst I've seen so far. This, together with the fact that the keybinds for abilities are broken, makes me think that there wasn't any actual gamers in the QA/playtesting that was done. They would have put the difficulty up to max and used the actual controls and noticed all of these problems and complained. So yeah, I'm being pretty confrontational here, but of course this was just in a little closed group of 100 people or so with the developers, so the sensible thing to do would have been to acknowledge this in whatever way, or, you know, challenge it or say that they're taking it on board, but this was all just ignored. This was ignored. And seeing as they were ignoring me, I just decided to ignore them back, because they don't care about making the games better, they don't care about feedback. I'm just there to get these games early, and I'm just being free quality assurance at this point, so I might as well get something for it. I might as well make videos and have fun doing it, so that's what I did, and we'll get into that now. And here's the video that I eventually made. 17th of August, why Total War's last success was 8 years ago. And this is the reason, the main reason, the first reason, the reason that comes before everything else, because this precludes meaningful challenge for ambitious players, which is what I consider myself to be. And I have a lot of company, and there's a lot of people that want to eventually be ambitious with their gameplay that just can't because there's nothing to look forward to. So, there we go. 100,000 views, 120,000 views, 2,000 dislikes, and that is all from butthurt Warhammer fanboys in a tiny time span. I can actually go into analytics and show that those dislikes all appeared at the exact same time from the shithole subreddit. No Total War has ever had hidden combat modifiers more destructive than Troy, with heavy spears losing 7-1 in a controlled fair fight. And that was in August. And then fast forward a few months to December, and someone makes a video basically echoing my points, mirroring my sentiments, and getting almost as many views, because of course Warhammer is in the title, so it's algorithm friendly. But yeah, that's what I did. What happened next? What is this all about? What am I getting to? What is my point? Here it is. They did a Q&A on their Discord, and they've got a lead designer, a senior designer, and community managers. And I think a lead designer is the guy in charge of the whole project, and a senior designer is someone under him that coordinates. So lead designers coordinate senior designers, and the senior designer here said, in response to a question, are there any changes or improvements made to the difficulty system? He chose to respond, or they chose to respond, and they would only respond to this question if they thought it served a purpose, and that purpose is to please people. So this is an answer that they think is going to make people happy, and they're correct about that. But this shows they think that I was right. They think that we are all right for complaining about these fucking modifiers. They see that it is the case. The arguments stand up. They hold water. 10 months later, it's acknowledged finally. And this is the first time I think that they've acknowledged the damaging aspect of this ham-handed approach. So he says, from a battle perspective, we've reduced the melee bonuses that AI gets on hard and very hard, as they were very punishing for melee units. This is them acknowledging that their approach was flawed all along. This is them admitting that their system was shit this whole time, and that I was right this whole time. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous that it takes 10 months for them to admit what was always just fucking obvious. And it's absurd that I got pushback for this. 2,000 fucking twats disliking over a title that has implications for Warhammer, because of course I just ignored Warhammer in this fucking video. I don't think I even mentioned it once because I've never played it. Don't give a shit about it. Gave even less of a shit about it back then, and I just said Total War's last success was 8 years ago, and of course that sent them all into a fucking hysterical fit, a fucking tantrum. But it was all over nothing because my contention, the actual contention, has been acknowledged. So all the Warhammer fanboys that have been holding up their sacred game that's above reproach for the past 10 months, we've just had an acknowledgement that it's fucking flawed horribly. Not that we needed it, but the developers themselves have finally ceded and acknowledged it. Not only have they acknowledged it, but they thought that it served a PR purpose to acknowledge. Oh, and that reminds me, along those lines, they also decided to acknowledge me. So they've determined that I've been on the money enough, that there's enough people that care about what I think, that if they continue to not even acknowledge me and my arguments, that'll make them look more bad than if they just fess up and start being honest about my existence. What a contrast that is with 10 months ago when we had this. Also, it must look bad if they're patching 3K pretty much directly in accordance with my critiques of it in broad fucking daylight, And also, when the first full title that they release since I start my critiquing seems to just incorporate all of my criticisms. Oh, and that reminds me of another thing. My first critique video was on difficulty modifiers, but my second one was on single entities. And look at that. What do you know? Oh my god. So, that's critique 1, check. Critique 2, check. Oh man, this is such a shit show. Such a weird situation. Oh my god. But the thing about this that's really annoying is that even though they've acknowledged that this is deleterious, this is damaging to their game, they haven't removed it, they've just reduced it. So they've slightly ameliorated their situation. They've mitigated it a little bit, but it's still there. Someone on my Discord summed this situation up perfectly. I like that they've been made to agree that the difficulty stat changes affect gameplay negatively, but rather than just removing them, they reduce them. Okay, we will make the game incrementally less shit. We've decided melee units should only be bad on Legendary instead of terrible. Holy shit. It's just it's so perfect. So we need to keep pushing for the removal of this because they still don't get it. And what happens in the meantime? Have they improved the AI? What fills the gap? This was such a bad, fake difficulty. This offered up such a phony challenge. What do we have instead of this phony, empty challenge from now on? Have they actually improved the AI? This is what we want to know. Where is the challenge going to come from then? Because if they've reduced the difficulty modifiers, what challenge is going to turn up to replace it? That's what we should be asking for, while we continue to push to have these modifiers just outright removed and never appear in future Total War games. Alright, that's it from me. Thought you would find this interesting because this has serious ramifications for everyone that wants to play Total War games to come out in the future, because have no doubt Warhammer 3 is going to play completely differently now than it would have otherwise if they had not recognised this mistake and taken this small step, which will hopefully be the first step in a path that eventually eradicates this garbage. And if you had been complaining for the past 10 months about this, past 10 months especially, but beyond that, if you've ever complained about these shitty hidden combat modifiers from difficulty, then this is what you should want. This is a victory, and hopefully there will be many more to come. Alright, I'm out. Thanks goes out to my patrons for supporting my work over on Patreon. Special thanks goes to Matteo Olivetti, Nerdington, the Rode451, Halcyon, and Robert Sparks.